The moment security escorted her out, Rochelle Jenkins knew her world had changed. One hand clutched her purse, the other wrapped tightly around her 4-year-old son Elijah, who sniffled into her coat. The lobby of Harmont and Price was sleek and modern, its glass walls reflecting a world that seemed to be closing in on her. Her supervisor's voice still echoed in her head. "This isn't a playground, Rochelle. You're done here." No compassion. No questions. Just a pink slip and public humiliation because her sitter canceled and she dared to choose her child over protocol. It was raining that morning, not just outside but in Rochelle's spirit. She had begged her boss, Marla Vicks, for one more chance, just one more hour to finish data entry so she could clock out and take Elijah home. But the company's strict no-child policy left no room for human need. As the automatic doors hissed shut behind her, Rochelle forced a smile for Elijah. "We're okay, baby," she whispered. But her hands trembled as they walked into the wet wind. Her paycheck was gone. Rent was due. Elijah's asthma medicine would run out in 2 days. Rochelle was no stranger to hardship. She'd worked 3 jobs after high school, saved every penny, and finally landed that temp-to-hire admin position at Harmont and Price. She believed it would change their lives. But one misstep, bringing her son during an emergency, had cost her everything. As she walked the cracked sidewalk toward the bus stop, Elijah's cough tightened in her ears. She wrapped her coat tighter around him, whispering soft reassurances while the cold soaked through her clothes and down to her bones. At home, Rochelle stared at a nearly empty fridge and made a meal out of canned beans and toast. Elijah drew spaceships on the back of an overdue electric bill. Rochelle watched him and tried not to cry. He was such a bright, curious boy, always asking questions, always pretending he could fix broken things with tape and string. As he laid his head on her lap that night, she whispered, "One day, baby, the world's gonna see you. You're gonna do big things." She didn't know how, but she had to believe it. Over the following months, Rochelle cleaned houses, walked dogs, and worked late-night shifts at a grocery store. She carried Elijah on her hip through laundromats and stood in food pantry lines with blistered feet. She applied to dozens of office jobs but heard the same thing each time: "We're looking for someone with more stability." Elijah, meanwhile, never complained. Even when his birthday came and went with just a slice of day-old cake, he hugged her and said, "It's okay, Mama. We have each other." And that, for Rochelle, was everything. Rochelle's break came not in a shiny office building, but in a worn community center on the south side. She had gone there to pick up a donated inhaler for Elijah and ended up chatting with the receptionist, an older woman named Miss Hattie. "You ever done data entry?" Hattie asked, squinting through thick glasses. "We could use someone with quick fingers. Pay ain't much, but it's steady." Rochelle blinked, stunned. Yes, I've done admin work." Hattie smiled and slid a clipboard across the counter. "Then you start Monday, honey." The job wasn't glamorous. It was dusty rooms, outdated software, and stacks of handwritten forms from local food banks and housing support programs. But Rochelle showed up every day with Elijah in tow. He sat quietly in the corner with crayons while she typed until her fingers cramped. She never complained. She worked harder than anyone, and her precision caught the eye of the center's director, Mr. Ronald Banks, who gave her more responsibilities each week. "I see something in you," he said one afternoon. "You're sharp. You think fast. You could run this place one day." Rochelle's self-worth began to mend. She was no longer the woman who got fired for being a mother. She was the woman keeping a small but vital community program running. When Elijah started kindergarten, he would wave proudly at her from the hallway, telling his teachers, "My mama works with the boss." She enrolled in evening business classes with Mr. Banks's encouragement. It wasn't easy. She often studied with Elijah asleep on her lap, but her grades were stellar. The pain of her past still lingered, but she was building something stronger now, a future. By the time Elijah turned 12, Rochelle had earned her associate's degree in nonprofit management. Mr. Banks retired and named her as interim director. Donors loved her. Volunteers respected her. She started programs to teach financial literacy to single parents and advocated for workplace childcare policies across the city. Every time she spoke at events, she shared a version of her story, not to shame but to inspire. "We're not asking for handouts," she would say. "We're asking for understanding, for dignity, for a chance." Elijah watched his mother transform with awe. He remembered her walking him to the bus in the rain, her shoes soaked through. He remembered the days they split peanut butter sandwiches and used the oven for heat. And now he watched her stand tall in heels, speaking truth to power without flinching. At night, he would sit beside her, working on his homework while she drafted grant proposals. "You're a superhero, Mama," he told her once. Rochelle only smiled and said, "No, baby. I'm just your biggest believer. The real hero? That's gonna be you." At 16, Elijah became laser-focused. He wasn't just smart, he was driven. He spent weekends at the library studying business models and coding tutorials, applying for every scholarship he could find. Rochelle never pressured him. She only supported, always saying, "Chase what lights you up, baby." One evening, he came to her with a look she recognized, fire in the eyes, nerves in the jaw. "I want to study business, tech and leadership. I want to build something. Something better than what hurt you." Rochelle's heart clenched. "Then you will," she said. "And I'll be right here cheering you on." Elijah's acceptance letter to Stanford arrived in a plain envelope, but its weight changed everything. Rochelle held it in shaking hands, rereading the words over and over, "Full academic scholarship." She laughed, cried, and held Elijah close. "This is your door, baby," she whispered. "Walk through it." The night before he left, they sat on the floor eating takeout, surrounded by boxes. "You nervous?" she asked. Elijah looked at her, eyes gleaming. "Yeah. But every time I feel scared, I just picture you walking through fire for me. If you could survive that, I can survive anything." Stanford was a new world, but Elijah adapted quickly. He soaked up knowledge like a sponge, sat in on leadership seminars, and interned at tech startups during summer breaks. But even as he moved through Silicon Valley circles, he never forgot home. He kept a photo of his mom at her old desk, sleeves rolled up, head bent in focus. He built his senior thesis around workplace equity and the power of inclusive leadership, using his mother's experience as the central case study. Professors called it groundbreaking. Elijah called it truth. Upon graduation, he declined offers from flashy firms and instead joined a mid-sized tech company with potential but poor morale. The culture was cold. Workers were overburdened and underseen. Elijah moved quickly up the ranks, not because he played politics but because he listened. He implemented quiet reforms. Flexible schedules, on-site childcare, mentorship programs for junior staff. He often thought of his mother typing late into the night, Elijah beside her with a coloring book, and wondered how different her life would have been with just a little grace. Then one day, a headline made Elijah stop cold. Harmont and Price appoints new CEO following controversy over discrimination lawsuit. He stared at the name for a long time, the same company that had fired his mother all those years ago. The same glass tower where she was humiliated for being a mother with no choice. They were looking for bold leadership. Someone to fix a broken culture. Elijah closed his laptop and whispered to himself, "Time to go home." He pulled out a photo of Rochelle and nodded. "This one's for you, Mama." The lobby hadn't changed much. Same marble floors, same glass walls, same coldness. But this time, Elijah wasn't a child clutching his mother's hand. He wore a navy suit, tailored to perfection, and walked with a quiet confidence that turned heads. As he approached the receptionist desk, a security guard looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" Elijah smiled calmly and replied, "Yes. I'm Elijah Jenkins. I'm here for the final CEO interview." The receptionist blinked, flustered. "Of course. Right this way." And just like that, he stepped into the very boardroom where his mother had been fired. The board was composed of 8 people, all sharp suits and older faces. They asked questions with clipped professionalism, vision statements, financial goals, restructuring plans. Elijah answered everyone with precision and poise. But toward the end, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "What makes you believe you understand the kind of change we need?" He paused, then spoke, not with rehearsed corporate lingo but with his truth. "Because this company once fired a single mom who brought her sick child to work. That child was me. And I remember everything about that day." The room went still. One man cleared his throat. "That's a compelling story." Elijah didn't flinch. "It's more than a story. It's a culture problem. You didn't just lose an employee that day. You lost trust. You lost dignity. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I know how to build a company where people matter." He leaned forward, voice steady. "I'm not interested in running Harmont and Price as it was. I'm interested in transforming it into what it should have always been." Pause. Then the board chair nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. We'll be in touch." 2 weeks later the call came. Elijah was sitting on the worn couch in Rochelle's living room, sipping sweet tea when his phone buzzed. He answered, heart pounding. "Elijah Jenkins? We're pleased to offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately." For a moment he said nothing. Rochelle turned to him, eyebrows raised. He looked up, tears brimming. "Mama," he whispered, "I got it." She dropped her tea. "What do you mean you got it?" He grabbed her hands. "I'm the new CEO of Harmont and Price." Rochelle's hand flew to her mouth. Her knees buckled. "Elijah." The first thing Elijah did after accepting the position was return to the company in a crisp white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled. He walked the halls, introducing himself to every department personally. He asked about families. He listened to concerns. He made notes. And when he finally reached the large conference room on the 12th floor, the very one where Rochelle had once stood trembling with a feverish child in her arms, he asked the janitor to prop the door open. "We're changing the energy in this place," he told his assistant. "This room will never be a space for shame again." The company's annual town hall had always been a dry affair. Slideshows, quarterly updates, stiff applause. But this year, Elijah made a change. He requested the event be held in the company atrium, with open seating and a community feel. Food trucks lined the parking lot. Childcare was available on site. Employees buzzed with curiosity, unsure what to expect from their new CEO. At noon sharp, Elijah stepped onto the low platform in front of over 300 employees. He wasn't flanked by executives. He stood alone. "Before we talk numbers," he began, "I want to talk about people." A hush fell. "Years ago," Elijah said, "a woman was fired in this very building. Her crime? Bringing her sick son to work because she had no other option. She was humiliated and escorted out. That boy watched it happen. He never forgot." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "I was that boy. And today I stand here as your new CEO. Not because I want to erase the past, but because I want to redeem it." The silence was electric. Heads turned. A few mouths fell open. One HR director quietly wiped a tear from her eye. Elijah took a breath and continued. "That woman, my mother, did everything for me. She worked night shifts, cleaned houses, studied by flashlight so she could one day lead a nonprofit that changed lives. And even when the world told her she wasn't enough, she kept going. Today, I want to honor her publicly." A staffer opened a side door. Rochelle stepped in, stunned. Elijah smiled as she hesitated. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the strongest leader I know, my mother, Rochelle Jenkins." The crowd erupted in applause. Rochelle stood frozen, hand over her chest, tears pouring silently. Elijah stepped down and met her halfway, gently guiding her forward. "She's the reason I'm here. And she's the reason we're about to change how this company treats working parents, especially single mothers." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a framed certificate. "Starting today, we are naming our new family support program the Jenkins Initiative, offering flexible hours, emergency childcare access, and full healthcare support for all employees with children. Because no one should have to choose between being a good employee and a good parent." The crowd stood, clapping louder now, some with hands over their hearts, others openly crying. Rochelle turned toward Elijah, her voice barely audible. "You didn't have to do this?" He shook his head. "You did everything for me. This is the least I could do." He wrapped his arms around her, and for a moment the past, present, and future collided in one silent embrace. In that moment, Rochelle no longer felt like the woman who was escorted out. She felt like the woman who built a king. Later that evening, long after the atrium emptied and the applause faded, Elijah asked Rochelle if she'd take a walk with him. They rode the elevator in silence to the 12th floor. As the doors opened, Rochelle instinctively froze. The hallway looked exactly as it had that day, polished floors, cold lighting, sterile silence. Elijah noticed her hesitation and gently offered his arm. "You don't have to go in," he said softly. Rochelle swallowed, her voice shaking. "No, I need to." Together, they stepped into the conference room that had once become her breaking point. The room was quiet but not unkind this time. Elijah walked to the far wall where a framed plaque now hung. Rochelle followed, reading slowly, "To every parent who ever had to choose between their child and their paycheck, may you never have to again." Her breath caught. Elijah turned to her. "I had the plaque installed this morning. It stays here. Always." She looked at her son, seeing not just the confident executive, but the boy who once coughed in her arms while she stood terrified before her boss. "You turned pain into purpose," she whispered. They sat for a while, Rochelle in one of the chairs she once wasn't allowed to rest in, Elijah beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "I still remember how tight you held me. I remember your heartbeat, fast and scared, but I also remember how you whispered, 'We're going to be okay.' Even then you were my rock." Rochelle shook her head gently. I was so scared, Eli. I didn't know what we'd do. I just knew I couldn't let you down. Elijah smiled, eyes glossy. And you never did. Not once. Before they left, Elijah took one last glance around the room. This place used to haunt me, he said. But not anymore. Now it's where change began. Rochelle looked out the window, the city lights below twinkling like stars. You didn't just come back to this company, she said. You reclaimed it. And in doing that, you gave every struggling parent a little more hope. Elijah nodded, thoughtful. It's not about being the hero, he said. It's about making sure no one else has to live that same story. They left the room hand in hand, walking side by side down the hallway that had once felt like a gauntlet. Rochelle's steps were no longer heavy with shame, they were steady with pride. Employees who passed them nodded respectfully, not out of obligation but out of admiration. And as they reached the elevator, Elijah pressed the button and smiled. Ready to go home? Rochelle glanced at him and said, for the first time in a long while, I already am. From that moment forward, Elijah led with a different kind of authority. He wasn't interested in titles or perks, he was interested in people. Every department received surveys asking what they needed to thrive. Janitors and receptionists were given direct lines to HR. Paid family leave was extended. Quarterly listening days replaced some executive meetings. Days when Elijah walked the floor, sat in staff lounges and listened. Not to defend. Not to fix. Just to hear. And that, more than anything, began to heal the fractures no policy ever had. In one department, an older file clerk named Miss Yvonne cried in front of him. I've worked here 20 years, she said, voice trembling. And this is the first time anyone's asked me what I needed. Elijah pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Then let's start now. He wrote down her suggestions himself. When they were implemented, she placed a thank you note in his inbox. You made me feel seen. I'll never forget it. Elijah taped it to his office wall, next to the drawing he'd made as a child of Mama's office. He also created a mentorship program pairing young interns with seasoned staff. Each match met weekly over lunch, paid for by the company. The cafeteria became a melting pot of stories. Single moms sharing survival hacks, interns learning how to budget their first paycheck, veterans recalling their first time clocking in. Rochelle volunteered as a guest mentor once a month. She told her story openly. I was fired in this building, she would begin, but my son brought us back here. And now we build bridges where walls once stood. The company's image changed. Employee retention skyrocketed. Talent from underrepresented backgrounds began applying in record numbers. News outlets picked up the story, from fired to inspired, how one CEO rebuilt a company from the inside out. When asked what drove him, Elijah always said the same thing. I remember how it felt to be invisible. I want to build a company where no one has to feel that way again. And every time he said it, he meant it. Outside work, Elijah and Rochelle settled into a new rhythm. On Sundays they shared brunch and long walks. Rochelle still ran her nonprofit and often collaborated with Harmont and Price on community outreach programs. Elijah spoke at schools encouraging young kids, especially boys from single-mother homes, to dream boldly. You're not broken, he would tell them. You're becoming. And in quiet moments, when Rochelle looked at her son speaking to a crowd or offering a tissue to a teary employee, she'd whisper a silent prayer of thanks, not for the title but for the man he had become. One rainy afternoon, as Elijah sifted through his office mail, he noticed a cream-colored envelope with no return address. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. He opened it curiously and unfolded a single-page letter. Dear Mr. Jenkins, it began. You won't remember me, but I remember you. I was a junior analyst at Harmont and Price the day your mother was fired. I watched her carry you out of the building in silence. I didn't say anything. I didn't stand up. I've regretted that moment for over 20 years. Elijah sat down, the weight of the words settling on his chest. I followed your journey. I saw the town hall online. I cried when you honored your mother. I never had the courage to say anything back then, but please let me say this now. I'm sorry. And thank you. You made something beautiful out of something that once made all of us feel ashamed. The letter ended simply, with respect, Miranda Leeds. Elijah stared at the signature. The name rang a bell. He opened the old employee archive and found her photo. She had been just 23 back then. He reached out through the return address on the back of the envelope. A week later, Miranda walked into his office. Older now, with streaks of silver in her hair and soft lines around her eyes, she looked both nervous and relieved. I wasn't sure you'd respond, she said. Elijah stood and extended his hand. You didn't have to, he replied. But you did. That takes courage too. She sat, eyes misting. I've thought about that day more times than I can count. I should have said something. Should have spoken up. But I was scared. Elijah nodded. Sometimes silence is easier. But what you did today, this letter, it matters. They talked for nearly an hour. She shared how that moment shaped her, how she left the company shortly afterward, disillusioned. But watching what you've done here, it brought me peace I didn't know I needed. Before she left, Elijah handed her a visitor's badge. If you ever want to speak to our mentorship circle, I think you have something valuable to say. Miranda smiled through her tears. I'd like that. Thank you for forgiving my silence. That night, Elijah sat on his balcony, the city glittering below. Rochelle joined him with 2 mugs of tea. You okay, baby? She asked. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly, the corner of her lip twitching. So many people saw and said nothing, she murmured. Elijah wrapped an arm around her shoulder. Maybe they were quiet then. But the world is different now. And maybe that's enough. Rochelle leaned against him, her voice soft. You were always enough. And together they watched the city breathe beneath them. A month later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Elijah asked Rochelle to meet him at a small cafe near the lake. She arrived wearing her favorite scarf, the one with little gold threads he gave her for her 50th birthday. He stood as she approached, hugging her tightly before guiding her to a table under an umbrella. You're being extra formal, she said with a smile. What's going on? Elijah handed her a small white envelope, identical in size to the one that once carried his Stanford letter. Rochelle raised an eyebrow. Another scholarship? She joked. She opened the envelope slowly and read the crisp letter inside. Her breath hitched. This is, she began, blinking. A deed. Elijah, this is a deed. He nodded. To the house on West Juniper. The one with the porch swing you always loved. It's yours now. Paid in full. Rochelle covered her mouth, tears welling instantly. You didn't? He reached for her hand. I did. You've rented your whole life, Mama. You deserve something that's yours. A place you never have to leave. You gave me stability when you had none. Let me give it back. Rochelle was speechless. Her heart swelled so fast she could barely speak. Elijah, I never wanted anything from you but your happiness. And you gave me that, he said. Now I get to give you rest. She pressed the letter to her chest. This isn't just a house. This is proof that we made it. That all the nights I stayed up praying weren't for nothing. Elijah smiled. You made me into a home. It's only right I return the favor. They toasted with glasses of orange juice and laughed through happy tears, drawing curious smiles from nearby tables. Moving day was filled with sunlight and joy. Volunteers from Rochelle's nonprofit helped carry boxes. Elijah rolled up his sleeves and fixed the leaky faucet himself. In the backyard, Mateo, one of Rochelle's mentor, dug holes for her garden beds while Rochelle arranged books on the new living room shelves. Her favorite frame, a photo of Elijah as a toddler, went on the mantel first. And that night, after everyone had gone, Rochelle stood alone in the doorway, looking at the walls that now held her peace. Thank you, God, she whispered. This time we are home. Later, as Elijah tucked the deed into a fireproof box beneath her bed, Rochelle placed a hand on his shoulder. You know what I think about sometimes? She said. That day I got fired. I thought everything was over. I thought I had ruined our lives. But maybe that was the very beginning? Elijah nodded. It was. And we turned that ending into the best start anyone could ask for. Rochelle pulled him into a hug, her voice warm against his ear. If I ever doubted my purpose, you proved me wrong. And Elijah held her tighter. Weeks later, Elijah was invited to speak at Westridge High, the same school where he once struggled through secondhand textbooks and cafeteria whispers about his worn sneakers. The auditorium buzzed with restless energy as teens filed into plastic seats, barely glancing at the program labeled, Guest Speaker, CO Elijah Jenkins. When he stepped onto the stage in a navy blazer and white sneakers, some students looked up, curious. He didn't start with statistics. He started with a story. My mom once got fired for bringing me to work because she couldn't afford a babysitter, he said. Silence fell instantly. He told them about the bus rides in the rain, the nights they slept with the oven open for warmth, and the one-bedroom apartment they shared behind the corner laundromat. He didn't sugarcoat the struggle. But he also didn't dwell in pity. That pain, he said, became fuel. Every time someone said I didn't belong, I pictured my mom walking out of that building holding my hand. And I promised myself, we'd never be invisible again. Dozens of heads lifted. Eyes widened. Phones were lowered. His story was no longer someone else's. It was theirs. He spoke about building something that mattered, about leadership rooted in empathy, about how success isn't about climbing, it's about lifting. When he finished, the auditorium erupted in applause, real, unforced, thunderous. A young girl from the front row stood up, voice shaky. "Do you really think someone like me could be like you?" Elijah stepped down from the stage, walked toward her, and looked her in the eye. "I think someone like you could be even greater. All you need is someone to believe it before you see it. Let that someone be you." Afterward, students crowded him with questions, hugs, selfies. Teachers cried. One janitor quietly pulled him aside and whispered, "My daughter's in that audience. You just gave her something I couldn't, proof." That night, Rochelle sat across from Elijah at their favorite diner, still glowing from the footage she saw online. "You've become the kind of man I used to pray you'd meet. Turns out I raised him instead." Elijah chuckled. "You didn't just raise me, Mama. You built me, brick by brick." They clinked coffee cups. No champagne. No cameras. Just legacy. Weeks later, a wall near the Westridge High Gym was painted with a mural, Elijah's silhouette walking hand in hand with a young boy beneath the words, "Strength is built, not born." Beneath it, students left notes, "I won't give up now. My mom's a hero too. We're gonna make it." Rochelle visited the mural one afternoon and stood quietly, hand pressed to her chest. She wasn't just a visitor. She was part of the art. Part of the story. The beginning that nobody saw, until it shaped everything. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the sky bruised with streaks of orange and indigo. Rochelle sat on the porch swing of her new home, a cup of tea warming her hands. Elijah joined her, fresh from a long week of meetings, his tie loosened and his shoulders relaxed. They didn't speak for a while. Just rocked gently, the creak of the swing matching the rhythm of the wind. Finally, Rochelle broke the silence. "I used to sit like this after putting you to bed, thinking, how will I make it to Friday? Now I sit here thinking, how did we make it here?" Elijah glanced at her, his voice low. "I think about it too. Every day. Not just the struggles, but the way you smiled through them even when I didn't understand. You built something from nothing, Mama. You didn't just raise me. You gave me the blueprint." Rochelle shook her head gently, a tear escaping down her cheek. "All I ever wanted was for you to feel safe. To feel seen." Elijah reached over and held her hand. "I see you. Every room I walk into, I carry your name with me. Every boardroom. Every speech. You're there." The crickets started to sing as the sun dipped lower. Elijah looked up at the stars blinking into view. "Sometimes I wonder what that HR manager would say now. The one who fired you." Rochelle chuckled. "She'd probably ask for a meeting with your assistant." They laughed, not out of bitterness but freedom. The pain had transformed into power. The memory, once sharp and cruel, now stood in their history like a burned bridge, no longer needed but never forgotten. A symbol of how far they'd come. A breeze lifted the hem of Rochelle's scarf. She pulled it close and looked at Elijah, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know what my favorite moment has been?" He shook his head. "It wasn't the house. Or the town hall. Or even the mural. It was watching you hold the door open for someone else, in the same place that once slammed it shut on us. That's what healing looks like." Elijah blinked back emotion. "You taught me that. Grace in the storm. Light in the dark. You gave me everything." The porch light flickered on as the first star settled overhead. Elijah stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, Mama. Let's go inside." Rochelle rose slowly, taking his hand like she had done so many years ago. They walked together through the door, not as survivors of the past but as authors of a new story. One built on grit, grace, and generations of strength. The kind of story that whispers to anyone still in the struggle, "Don't give up. This is not your end. It might just be your beginning."